When James Mercer was sentenced to 5 years in Black Ridge Correctional Facility, he thought his life couldn't get any worse. Known as the Bone Cage by the inmates, the prison had a reputation for being one of the most brutal in the state. But its brutal reputation wasn't what unnerved James the most. It was the stories about Cell Block C. "You don't want to end up in C," a grizzled inmate named Red warned him during his first week. "People go in there but not all of them come out." James laughed it off. "Yeah, sure. What? Is it haunted?" Red didn't laugh. Instead, he lowered his voice, glancing over his shoulder as if the walls themselves were listening. "Let's just say, you don't want to know what they're keeping in there." Cell Block C had been abandoned for years, ever since a mysterious riot resulted in the deaths of 23 inmates and 3 guards. Officially, it was closed for renovations, but James quickly learned that no one was working on it. He overheard whispers from the other inmates, shadows moving where they shouldn't, voices calling out late at night, and the faint sound of chains dragging across the floor. James had no intention of finding out if the stories were true, but fate had other plans. It happened during his second year when he got caught in a brawl in the cafeteria. He'd barely thrown a punch before the guards tackled him to the floor and hauled him to solitary. But solitary wasn't available that day. "We're taking him to C," a guard grunted. "What? No. I'll behave," James protested, struggling against their grip. But the guards didn't care. He was dragged down a long, dimly lit corridor toward the infamous cell block. The air grew colder as they approached. The fluorescent lights flickered, and an eerie hum filled the silence. The heavy iron doors of Cell Block C groaned as they swung open, revealing a dark, empty hallway lined with rows of rusted cells. "Enjoy your stay," one of the guards sneered, shoving him into the first cell on the left. The door slammed shut with a deafening clang. James immediately felt the weight of the silence pressing down on him. There were no inmates here, no guards patrolling, just him and the cold, oppressive air. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally in Cell Block C. The only sounds were the occasional drip of water and the distant creak of metal. James tried to sleep, but the cot was hard and his nerves wouldn't let him rest. And then the whisper started. At first he thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. Faint, unintelligible murmurs echoed down the corridor, too soft to make out but just loud enough to set his nerves on edge. "Hello?" James called out, his voice trembling. The whispers stopped. For a moment, all was silent again. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, growing closer with each passing second. "Who's there?" James pressed himself against the back wall of the cell, his heart pounding. The footsteps stopped just outside his cell. In the dim light, he could just make out a shadow, a tall, hulking figure standing motionless in the hallway. "Let me out," James begged. "I shouldn't be here." The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it slowly turned and vanished down the corridor. The next day, or what James assumed was the next day, he noticed something etched into the wall of his cell. It hadn't been there before. "Leave while you still can." James felt a chill run down his spine. The scratches were deep, as if whoever carved them had done so with desperate force. He tried to ignore it, but that night the whispers returned. This time they were louder, clearer. "Help me, help." James covered his ears, but the whispers only grew louder, surrounding him, seeping into his very bones. "Help us." When he couldn't take it anymore, he screamed, "What do you want from me?" The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, guttural laugh that echoed through the cell block. The next morning, James noticed another message carved into the wall. "It's hungry." He tried shouting for the guards, banging on the bars until his fists were raw, but no one came. The prison seemed deserted, as if he were the only one left. Desperation turned to terror when night fell. The footsteps returned, but this time they weren't slow or deliberate. They were frantic, chaotic, accompanied by the sound of chains rattling. Shadows darted past his cell, too fast to be human. And then he saw it. At the far end of the corridor, a figure emerged. It was tall and emaciated, its limbs unnaturally long, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Its face was a twisted amalgamation of features, human yet grotesquely wrong. It moved toward him with jerky, uneven strides, dragging chains behind it. James backed into the corner of his cell, trembling. "Stay away." The creature stopped just outside his bars, its head tilting unnaturally. And then it spoke, its voice a deep, bone-chilling rasp. "You can't leave." For the next week, James was tormented relentlessly. The creature appeared every night, sometimes whispering his name, sometimes clawing at the bars of his cell. Each morning, new messages appeared on the walls, written in a substance that looked disturbingly like blood. "Wants you. Running is futile. Join us." James grew weaker, his mind fraying at the edges. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, his every thought consumed by the terror of the night. On what he assumed was the 11th night, the creature finally entered his cell. "No," James whimpered, too weak to move. "Please?" The creature crouched over him, its foul breath filling his nostrils. Its glowing eyes bored into his soul. And then everything went black. When the guards finally opened cell block C a week later, they found the cell empty. There was no sign of James Mercer, no blood, no body, only a single message scrawled across the wall. "It's never full." They locked the doors and left the cell block undisturbed, but the whispers continued, growing louder with each passing night. And every now and then, a prisoner would swear they saw a figure lurking in the shadows, its glowing eyes watching, waiting for the next soul to claim.